As some of you may have noticed, with the previous reforms Joseph II had made, he seemed to be trying to overcome the Hungarian nobility in particular. Now, these nobles had held significant power over the Austrian crown for quite some time, right? So, this caused him to issue what became known as the Mandat, right? This piece of legislation meant that all government proceedings will be held in German rather than Latin. And this was pretty significant due to the Hungarian nobles being now forced to learn German. This effectively was telling them, hey, you are an Austrian citizen. You are underneath the crown. Before this piece of legislation, they had somewhat of autonomy and distance from the Austrians, and they were able to believe that since they weren't learning German and weren't learning this Austrian official language, they were somewhat independent. But now it was clear they were Austrian citizens. The Hungarian nobles obviously fought against this legislation, but due to Joseph's power, him being an absolute monarch, he was able to fully implement the law. Now, he also had somewhat of a fight with the Catholic Church, right? He tried to diminish the power over the crown. This was achieved through those previous reforms, such as the civil marriages and the tolerance legislation. However, it was an attempt to move to a more secular society, and one in which the crown was autonomous of religion. It was a part of the enlightened absolutism goal, move away from the religion controlling everyday life and move towards more of the state controlling everyday life. The dismantling of the 600 monk orders allowed for the crown to make money from the land and give to the poor. Now, this was an attempt to get more tax revenue from the more prosperous peasant farmers and the newly freed serfs, but it still helped out these peasant farmers and the poor. And this was pretty similar to Henry VIII when he took the church's land in an attempt to earn more taxes. Joseph II is essentially doing the same thing. And lastly, we get to further Hungarian issues, trying to limit the Hungarian authority. Now, the Hungarian autonomy was always tumultuous. Habsburg's rulers would increase autonomy before a war to try to gain and gather their support, and then decrease it when they were in peace, right? This often caused revolts because right before the war, they had quite a bit of autonomy, and right after you're telling me I no longer have these rights to do this, clearly these Hungarian nobles would be angry at this. But the Habsburgs didn't care. So at this point, the Hungarian nobles had become pretty wary of Habsburg rule. So then we get to the Magyar Revolt of 1788 to 1790. You see, Joseph II was currently in a major war against some of his enemies. And he tried to conscript more of the Hungarian peasantry and subjects. This angered the Hungarians because they didn't want to give him this support. So they rose up to fight Joseph II, and they basically forced him to resign because his wealth began to decrease, his armies were being defeated, he had foreign enemies, domestic enemies on his shore. He had to resign, and thus ended his reign. He resigned, and his brother, Leopold II, took over.